primary focus of shipindex.org is to make maritime history research easier to do. So I'd like to talk a bit about how we manage ships with the same name in the database. If you look for any ship that has the name of a woman, really, say Elizabeth, you're going to find thousands of citations in the database here. And actually, in this case, we have a couple of where we've been able to differentiate between particular ships, but there's like 3,800 almost different citations from 300 different resources. There's tons of vessels with the same name. It's my understanding that in Australia, you can only have one ship with any given name at any given time. And I'm often reminded of racehorses, which also you can only have one name. But of course, if you've got that ship in Australia, you after that one ship disappears, another one may come. And of course, there's every other country in the rest of the world as well. So you find many ships repeated, many ship names repeated many different times. And when there were up to 2.5 million citations in the database, this got to be really frustrating. And I had ways of going from, and of course, also if a ship changes its name, then you can't go from the listing of one ship name to another ship name because you don't know which citations are connected with which ship name. It turns into a big problem. And I was stumped by this for a long time. I was like, what do I do? How do I create an identifier to differentiate between these ships? And one of my colleagues, a friend, said, you know what I would do? I would use Wikidata identifiers. So before I get into what's going on here on the screen here of ships by the name of Columbia, I'd like to talk briefly about Wikidata identifiers, which might not be people might not be familiar with. Folks are certainly I'll go to Wikipedia. Folks are certainly familiar with Wikipedia, and as you know, there's a different Wikipedia in every different language. The EN is for English. If you DE, it'll be the German Wikipedia. And what you find on the German Wikipedia is not a translation of the English Wikipedia. It's just folks who speak German who have written these articles, and they are different from the English language articles. They're different from the French language articles. Oops. So let's go take a look at the entry for the USS Constitution. Now, there are, of course, for this, there are many different articles in different languages about this. But what the folks at Wikipedia realized was they needed an identifier. They needed a database rather than an encyclopedia entry to describe this vessel and all the other things that are in Wikipedia. And so they created Wikidata. The Wikidata database, and then added all of this information to it. You actually see here 34 different entries about USS Constitution in different languages. There's EN, of course, but also ES and FA, Farsi, I suppose, Persian, Indonesian. All of these different countries have entries about USS Constitution, but they all link back to this one. It has this Q identifier here. This is a unique number. The whole idea here is to have this unique number for this particular vessel. Now, anything can be in Wikidata. If you go to one of their famous ones is 42. People may know of 42 as the answer to the question of life, the universe, and everything. And so for 42, they made it the record for Douglas Adams. So you can see any person can have a record in here. It is not complete. It is getting to be comprehensive. It is not complete. Anybody can add any content to this. Someone said, okay, USS Constitution is a sailing frigate. Sailing frigate has its own Q identifier there of Q1201, and it has its own descriptions, and they have an example of a different vessel there, not Constitution. Every little bit of information that someone has chosen to add is in here, and it creates this database that people can work with. It's a really it's a neat thing. It is not being used for a whole lot of things, but it is kind of an underlying tool for building linked data. Linked data is the idea that I can say something over here and I can connect it to something over there without even knowing what is over there. And the idea here is that if everyone knows that this Q number is what we're going to use to describe USS Constitution, then we don't need to know if there's a record for it or not. That's where the record would be. And so if I go back here, and I'm just going to go to this web page for a second. I'm going to copy this Q number, and then I'm going to go to my record here, which there's a Q number there for that, USS Columbia. And if I type in that Q number that I took for Constitution, it's going to bring up the ship index record for USS Constitution. So this is sort of an underlying method. And we have collected this information from Wikidata. All of the information in Wikidata is freely accessible. It's freely available for anyone to use any way that they would like. Anyone can also go in there and edit it as well if they would like. So I'm going to step back here. I'm going to go away from Constitution. I'm going to talk about Columbia. Now, there are lots of vessels named Columbia, particularly in the Pacific Northwest, or named after places in the Pacific Northwest. And what my data team has done is that they have looked at each of these citations. Here's the example of the citations from the database, and they've said, oh, I can tell that this citation refers to, say, the lightship Columbia. And so that's what they've done here. Now, when so I'll go to this submarine USS Columbia. And when we look at these records here, you can see it's SSN 771. Naval vessels are pretty easy to connect because they usually have hull numbers, and that's pretty identifiable, and that's pretty doable. There are many down here. You see, it just says Columbia, cargo carriers of the Great Lakes. We don't know offhand which vessel that is, or at least I don't know, and my data team didn't know. Now, if you know, you can click on this report an error button here, and you can say citation should be connected to a particular Wikidata vessel. You can add that Wikidata Q identifier or the URL if you want. You don't have to, but if you give me an idea of what to connect it to, I can go ahead and do that. And so I will just jump ahead a little bit. I'll jump deep in here. You can see that these examples here, they have very little information in the index and then citation, because that's all the information that was in the index. Sometimes you can look at them and you can say, oh, okay, this is, I get a sense of what this is based on the resource, but that can be pretty hard. If I jump much further in, then I'm going to find, okay, Columbia steamer noted in the directory of 1899, and there's a lot more information. It's a lot easier to say, oh, that's not the attack submarine that I'm looking for example. But if I go back up here to this area where we have specific information about specific ships, you can choose any one of these. If we have an image, well, I shouldn't say we, if Wikidata has an image, then we have collected that and we are using that here to describe it. And that's completely legal, it's completely legitimate. That's what the Wikidata, as I said, is completely open access and people are allowed to use it. So here's a USS Great Northern, which also had the name Columbia. Other names for this vessel are listed here. And so that's why it comes up here. But I can find more information. I can go into any of these resources. And I'll say here's a link to Nauticopedia. How about that? This one was built in 1914 in Philadelphia, passenger freight vessel. And if I click on this button, it will take me into the Nauticopedia database and give me the information that's available in there. If in this one, here's the SSS, the Dorothy Alexander. Now we believe, I might have made a mistake. My data team might have made a mistake, but we believe these are all the same vessel. This is but this one is mentioned in the book, the H.W. McCurdy Marine History of the Pacific Northwest. Here are the page numbers for it. I don't have a link to that because that book is not digitized and available online, but at least you know that the book exists and then you can track it down. I'll keep scrolling down here to see if there are any that do have a link on their page numbers. It's tough for me to know for sure. I don't see any here. Here's an entry from Steamboat Bill, and it's got, there's a sort of variation in how these things are how the information is recorded here, but this will also lead you to those particular resources. When I have found the book available online in HathiTrust or Google Books, we have links, actually in most cases, directly to the page that's mentioned there, but many of these books are not going to be available electronically yet, and I don't have the time or the resources to figure out how to get copyright permissions to put full text content online. That's not something I'm going to pursue. I believe there's a lot better ways for me to spend my time, to be honest. So here's a light cruiser, the USS Columbia. Here's a MV Columbia, SS Belgenland, which has some connection. It was known as Columbia at one point. And so, but in Wikidata, they have one name for the vessel, that's the Belgenland, but it represents all these other names for the same hull as well. One other thing I would like to point out that I think people often miss is, let's see. I need to go back to my search again. At the top of each page, it shows exact match. So these are vessels whose name is Columbia. But you can look for other vessels that also mention Columbia. Like here is the Amiltal Columbia. Now I'm not quite sure what we're going to find here. Okay, there's a fishing vessel from New Zealand, and then here's a trawler, and then here's a WorldCat record. I'll go ahead and take a look at this WorldCat record and see what we find. Here is I mentioned WorldCat. It's the resource that has all this information from all these different libraries around the world. This is a resource that is either by or about this vessel, Amiltal Columbia. And here we find something about a fire on board. And I guess that there must be an image of this in the National Library of New Zealand. So that could be really interesting if one of your ancestors, say, was on board the vessel at that time. There are a lot of ways that you can do some advanced searching. So the advanced terms are admittedly kind of complicated, but I can have, if I know that the name of the vessel, I want to look for Columbia in the name of the vessel. So I say at ship name, and I want Columbia to be the back half of that name. I don't know what will turn up, but I think something will. So we'll give it a try here. Okay, so here we found Lady Columbia, Ocean Columbia, Signet Columbia, Spirit of British Columbia, etc. These are different ways that people can do research in the database. So it's pretty advanced in the ways that you can search in here. And for each of these, you may find a little bit, you may find, I don't know, here's in Lewis and Dryden's Marine History of the Pacific Northwest, which was the precursor to McCurdy's Marine History. Apparently, there is an illustration in there as well. And when you have a lot of vessels mentioned, you can differentiate, you can limit it just to the ones that have illustrations or just the ones that have passenger lists or crew lists. So that's a brief overview of some of the stuff that you can do when you're searching in the database.